The name of this program is Language in Action. On it, we shall consider the relationships of language and experience and many other things. As usual, the entire presentation will be done from the viewpoint of the logical, empirical discipline known as general semantics.
Yeah, hey, that sounds very dull. Anyhow, that's a lousy description of semantics.
Why, it's a perfect description of semantics. It tells everything.
It does not.
It does too.
It does not.
Does too.
Does not.
Well, at least we are agreed that it's time to introduce our senior colleague, Dr. S.I. Hayakawa.
Thank you, Fudley. I enjoy having you and Crashaw do the introductions for me, but I wonder if you two can't manage to do this without getting into an argument every time. Today we're going to talk about questions of agreement and disagreement, so I'd like you two especially to listen carefully. The title of today's program is Experience as Give and Take. Now, as you know, the general title of this series is Language in Action. And what we are considering is the problem of what language is about. That is, when you talk or I talk, what are we talking about? And in a way, it is true to say that inevitably we are talking about our own feelings, about our own knowledge, about our own experience, about what we know and about what we think we know. I think it was Wendell Johnson in the book People in Quandaries, to which I referred you earlier, who said that ultimately all talk is about oneself, because even the things that are apparently objective out there have passed through our own nervous systems in order to produce the statements ultimately that we make about them. Now, so today I'm going to talk about the nature of our knowings and the nature of our perceptions that determine what it is we know or think we know. Now, in order to talk about this subject, I'd like to introduce the name of the late Mr. Adelbert Ames, Jr. of Hanover, Massachusetts. Mr. Ames was a man deeply interested in problems of vision, first of all, although this particular interest led him into a large number of others, as I shall indicate. First of all, he started with, as everyone does, with the notion of vision as a purely mechanical process. That is, there are things out there in the world, they impinge upon the eye, and if you have faulty vision, the thing to do is to get the correct lenses, and then vision should be taken care of. And if refraction and the things that can be done by optical means were all there were to vision, then there wouldn't have been any further problem. But what Mr. Ames was concerned with is the fact that there were psychological and experiential elements in vision which were beyond the reach of lenses. And in order to understand fully all that went into the matter of vision, he began to go into the study of perspective, into the study of color, of light, and of all sorts of matters pertaining to vision. And in order to demonstrate his point of view, he ultimately got into psychology, among other things, and he also began to make a roomful of experiment after experiment in optical illusion. And a common thread ran through all these optical illusions. They all, in a way, confirmed his basic theory as to the nature of perception and the nature of vision. These all this took place at Hanover, New Hampshire in what he called the Dartmouth Eye Institute. And with these demonstrations then, he illustrated his theories, and as he got this room full of demonstrations together, more and more people got interested. First of all, of course, Dartmouth College people got interested, and then the fame of the demonstrations spread elsewhere, and eventually there were coming to him a stream of psychologists and art teachers and physical scientists and social scientists and teachers, all of whom looked at the demonstrations in the Dartmouth Eye Institute with increasing wonder and amazement. Because not only were they interesting in themselves, but these demonstrations had tremendously important implications for psychology, for teaching, and especially for philosophy. Now, among the people who came was John Dewey. And an important fact about the Ames demonstrations is that John Dewey, with Arthur Bentley, in writing the last book that came from Dewey's pen before he died, included the idea of the Ames experiments in his book called Inquiry into Inquiries. Now, these demonstrations are now on view at Princeton University, and there's another set of these demonstrations at Ohio State University. And from these various demonstrations that Professor Ames invented, I'm going to show one of them today. And fundamentally, what we have here to start with in this particular demonstration is the thing that he called the trapezoid window demonstration. Essentially, this consists of a box, and inside the box there's a little electric motor, the kind that you find on a clock. And mounted on a spindle is a window frame, or miniature window frame, made out of plywood, and this spindle can be mounted on the motor of the electric clock, and the switch can be turned on, and the thing rotates, as you see. Now let me try to explain the background of what it is that Mr. Ames is trying to demonstrate. What you see is the window going, of course, round and round very slowly. Traditionally, there have been two rival theories as to the nature of our knowings. That is, the nature of how we know what we think we know. First, there's what is called philosophically the materialist position, which says that the objective world out there, the world of things and objects, is the ultimate reality. Whereas another point of view says that what happens inside the mind, the subjective world, is the ultimate reality, and that the objective world is a world of illusion. From the modern philosophical point of view, particularly since Einstein and the modern physics, is that neither traditional idealism, the subjective point of view, or traditional materialism, the objective point of view, is entirely correct. Both those points of view are rendered obsolete by our new findings as to the nature of psychological perception. And in order to demonstrate what is meant by that, I want to show you the next stage of this demonstration. In addition to this ordinary window frame, Mr. Ames made a sort of phony window. It's the other window as it would look if seen from an angle like that. Now, this window is made in the geometrical form known as the trapezoid. It's narrower at one end than it is at the other. Shading has been painted on it in gray and white and black in order to make it really look like a window seen from an angle. And in addition, this window, instead of being made from quarter-inch plywood, as in the other case, is made out of thin sheet metal. Now, when this window is mounted on the spindle of this little electric clock, something different happens, which I'd like you to observe. Actually, as you look at this, the window appears to be going slowly back and forth instead of rotating as it actually does. Why does it do so? And let me try to explain why it does. In modern philosophy of science, it is said that the world of phenomena is a joint product of the observer and the observed. In the book by Dewey and Bentley, it is said that perception is a transaction between the observer and the observed. Now, the reason that this window seems to go back and forth, instead of seeming to go round and round as it actually does, is that we bring to the perception of this window certain memories and experiences which I shall next try to explain. We live in a civilization in which there are a large number of rectangular objects, including things like books and doors and windows and walls and carpets and tabletops, a number of other things. We learned way back in childhood, even before we were able to talk or walk, even at the stage when we were crawling on the floor, how to interpret a trapezoidal image falling on the retina. If, for example, there was a book lying on the floor in front of us, and we were crawling on the floor, notice that the near edge of this rectangle produces the wide edge of a trapezoidal image falling upon the retina. And as babies crawling on the floor, we learn to coordinate the reaching of our hands, giving a shorter reach for the wide end and a longer reach for the big end of a trapezoid. And when we picked up the trapezoid, we learned that it was a rectangle. And in a sense, we learned then to see by coordinating our muscles with our retinal images. And in a very real sense, it can be said that we see with the aid of our muscles. And this particular thing is just an example of it. We learned so very long ago that the wide end of a trapezoid is the near edge of a rectangle, that when we have an actual trapezoid presenting a wide edge to us all the time, it always appears to us to be the nearer edge, even when it happens actually to be farther away. And this early childhood learning, which goes back so far, is a matter that originates in our infancy and therefore inescapable.
Oh, isn't that the most fascinating demonstration that you ever saw? I can hardly believe it. But the way the doctor makes the window go back and forth, back and forth.
Back and forth? And what do you mean, back and forth? That window was going around and around and around.
I beg your pardon. Let me explain it to you exactly what happened. Dr. Hayakawa turned on the machine, and the window started to go back and forth, back and forth.
Say, are you crazy or something? Where do you think I was when the doc turned on the switch? I was right here, and I saw it as plainly as I see you. It went around and around and around.
Brashaw, have you been drinking?
What do you mean, drinking? What's the matter with you? It was going around and around and around.
Please, please, lie down and sleep it off, Crashaw, while I continue to explain to the people that the window was going back and forth in order to demonstrate Dr. Hayakawa's principle that...
Now, wait a minute. Cut it out, will you? I know as much as you are that the window was going...
Now, please, Mr. Crashaw.
Well, wait a minute. I'm not going to have you tell me anything like that. Most of the time I know what I'm saying. Now, listen here, please.
Calm down, gentlemen, calm down. In a way, you're both right. Would you listen to what I was saying? What I was saying is that perception is a transaction between the observer and the observed. And therefore, what you observed depended on your background and experience and your point of view at the time you were making the observation. Now, will you get this idea of perception as a transaction, and therefore each of you standing in different places with different backgrounds, we're bound to have a different transaction with the object out there. Now, because you had a different perception, you had a vigorous difference of opinion. And one of the points I would like to make is that we react to differences of opinion by often quarreling with and ultimately refusing to speak with those people with whom we seriously disagree. And what I would like to suggest is that this exactly is the point at which the difference of opinion should stimulate not silence or the breaking off of communication, but a serious attempt to communicate further in order to see what the bases of the difference are. Now, there's a next stage to this demonstration that I'd like to show you. This is a little cube on which there are a couple of little wires, and it can be mounted on the corner of the trapezoid window, and let's see what happens when we revolve that. Let me let it rotate one or two more times so that you can fully experience this illusion. What's going on here, if you experience this the way I do, is a sensation that that little box is going around in a circle, whereas the window is going back and forth, as if the box were moving entirely independently of the action of the window. In other words, there's a question of precedence involved in here. We learned the meaning of a trapezoid very, very early in life, as I said, and it was only later on that we learned that a box like this is not capable of moving independently. But since the meaning of the trapezoid is the earlier learning, it takes precedence over the other, and therefore, in order to preserve what is basically our deepest learning, we must continue to see the trapezoid going back and forth, and we must accept what is apparently impossible, namely the image of that cube going around in circles independently. In other words, in order to hang on to our deepest learnings and earliest learnings, we are prepared to see and believe what is manifestly impossible. Now, does this not describe to you the thinking habits of some of your friends and many of your relatives, perhaps? Certainly, what this implies, it also describes ourselves and how we react.
Hey, Doc.
Yes?
What have you done to that machine?
What do you mean? And say, where's Fuddley gone?
Ah, that stuff sure took off somewhere. But about that machine,
Yeah?
the little box goes right around the window.
That's right.
Hey, what are you teaching, magic?
Listen more carefully. Actually, the box and the window are going around together. And I'd like you to get the idea that experience then is a transaction between the observer and the observed.
Oh.
Well, I wish Fuddley were here to see this. And let me show you the next part of this demonstration, which is another aspect of it, which illustrates, in a sense, the same point. Let's take off this little box now and put in its place a little cardboard stick which can be mounted here. And we rotate it in the same way and see what happens. I wonder if you see the same thing the way I do, namely the illusion of the box of the stick going right through the window frame, although we know definitely that this cannot possibly be the case.
Well, well, well. You know, I never would have believed it. But from here, that stick doesn't wrap around the window at all.
What do you see? Where have you been, Fuddley?
Well, Doctor, I must admit I've been checking up on you from, shall we say, several points of view.
Oh, you've been checking up on me.
Yes, and you know, from here,
Yes?
the window does go around. Now, just look at that.
Well,
Around and around and around.
That's what I told you from the beginning, you windbag.
Now, just a moment, sir. I heard you talking about the second stage of the demonstration, the window and the box.
Oh, that. Well, that was different. Then the box did go around the window. I'm not going to let you and the doc confuse me anymore.
I assure you, Crashaw, it would be impossible for you to be more confused than you already are.
but Fuddley, didn't you tell me that in the first experiment the window went back and forth?
Ah, yes, Doctor, it did. It most assuredly did. It went back and forth.
That's a lie. It went around and around and around. Why not?
Are you trying to call me a liar?
That's what you are. I am not. You are, too. Wait a minute.
Gentlemen, please, please, please. I wonder if this demonstrates that we all make these transactions with reality, that we all tend, because of differences of background, point of view, and position of observation, to take a different view of the things that we experience. One person sees a thing going back and forth, another one sees it going around and around. Similarly, one person sees, let us say, labor unions as the salvation of the American worker, while others may see the labor union as a threat to free enterprise. One individual may see the protective tariff as the foundation of American prosperity, and other people will see the protective tariff as a barrier to international trade and therefore a barrier to world peace. More recently, we have seen, for example, some people looking at the Israeli attack upon Egypt as an attack of self-defense, while others looked upon it as an act of aggression. This fact that we all necessarily see the world in different ways is illustrated in a story told by the psychologist Snegan Combs in a book called Individual Behavior. One of them writes as follows, that one evening at dusk he was driving at a high rate of speed along a western road. Suddenly, an object about 2 feet in diameter appeared suddenly in the path of the car. The passenger screamed and reached for the steering wheel and tried to steer the car around the object. Meanwhile, the driver hung onto the wheel and drove right into it. Now, from the point of view of the passenger, this made sense because he saw the object as a rock, whereas the driver saw it as tumbleweed because he was native to the vicinity. But from one point of view, the other's choice of action seemed suicidal, if not utterly crazy. And nevertheless, from the point of view of each within his own framework, what he was doing made sense to him. In a similar way, there are bound to be then these differences of perception. Here's an African mast from the west coast of Africa. To some people, it is an object of beauty. To some people, it's the ugliest darn thing they ever saw. To those to whom it is an object of beauty, it is a masterpiece of abstract treatment of spaces and masses. And to others, it is simply a horrid thing done by illiterate savages, and why should we even look at it? But these differences in perception necessarily exist. We do have to take account, however, of these profound differences of perception. And these differences of perception suggest that in order that we handle them, we have to understand the background, the experience, and knowledge of the other. Let me suggest that in order to get the theoretical background of what I'm talking about, you look into some literature. You might look, for example, into Hadley Cantwell's book, The Why of Man's Experience, which suggests how we accumulate our ideas. Earl C. Kelly, on the basis of the Ames experiments, has written a book called Education for What is Real, which is an exploration of the educational implications of what the Ames experiments were about. And finally, there's a philosophical work, Dewey and Bentley's An Inquiry into Inquiries, for those of you who would like to tackle some heavier stuff. Now let me try to summarize what I've been saying. Ordinarily, when we find ourselves confronted with sharp difference of opinion, we are tempted to say of the person with whom we disagree, he is stupid, he is ignorant, he is misguided, he is an obstructionist, and so on. And we are tempted at this point to break off communication sharply with the statement, we don't want to speak to him again. What I am suggesting, on the other hand, is that these sharp differences of opinion are not points for the breaking off of communication, but points at which communication should seriously and earnestly begin. Well
spoken, Dr. Hayakawa.
Yeah, that's landing on the line, Doc.
Well, I'm glad you liked it.
Yes, we've agreed that since experience is transactional, by mutually communicating to each other the kinds of transactions we negotiate with the reality, we mutually enrich each other's perception.
And what he's trying to say, Doc, is that when we quit fighting, we learn something from each other.
Well, I'm glad you're sort of reconciling each other's views. What happened anyway? Well, I'm so glad that you're agreeing now, and I want to congratulate you. You got the point.
Oh, definitely.
Well, let me congratulate you both, gentlemen. Thank you very much for being with me.
This is National Educational Television.